Hello, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for tuning in. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Um, all right, let's get started. We have a packed schedule. My name is Danica. I'm the National Co-Director of Code Pink. Code Pink is a feminist-led anti-war organization that's been around for over 20 years now, and we are proudly partnering with the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice for a two-part webinar series on Pakistan as the current U.S. administration moves toward renewed political engagement with Pakistan. Many are seeking a clear understanding of how these shifts impact democracy and civil society, with a special reference to the role of the military's crackdown on political dissent. The US is cozying up to political leaders often comes with a lot of baggage and has resulted in a certain amount of fallout for people living in Pakistan, the diaspora, and around the world, and for Pakistan's neighbors as well. We hope to dissect some of the US-Pakistan relationship together and how some of its implications for Pakistanis and what it might mean for the rest of the region. So I will pass it over to Mehlaka Samdani, the Executive Director of the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice, to introduce today's conversation, what it hopes to accomplish, and our amazing speakers.
Great. Thank you so much, Danica. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mehlaka Samdani with the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice. And I am really honored to be co-hosting today's webinar with our partners at Code Pink. As a Pakistani American, I will never forget the time in 2012 when a delegation from Code Pink, led by Medea Benjamin, traveled all the way to Pakistan's tribal areas with the former Prime Minister Imran Khan to protest US drone strikes that were killing scores of innocent civilians and that were being carried out with the collusion of Pakistan's military and intelligence agencies. It was a big security risk for them to be there. And we are so grateful for Code Pink's solidarity then, and we are very grateful for their allyship today, especially at a time when Pakistan is experiencing one of the most severe crackdowns on dissent, marked by mass arrests, muzzling of the media, political persecution, hollowing of civilian institutions, especially the judiciary, and the targeting of journalists and activists by Pakistan's military and the current military-backed regime. People who've been speaking out against the military's human rights abuses are themselves being targeted. I'm sure many of you have heard that just 3 days ago, a young human rights, very outspoken lawyer, Iman Mazari, and her husband was sentenced to 17 years in prison each for merely tweeting about enforced disappearances and other human rights abuses. Such is the level of repression. Today's conversation is titled The U.S. Role in Pakistan, Repression, Imperialism, and Control. And that framing is intentional because despite Pakistan's numerous internal dysfunctions, it is very important to underscore that it is not entirely isolated from global and especially US power structures that have sustained and repeatedly normalized military authoritarianism in Pakistan. So this raises urgent questions, not only about what is happening inside Pakistan, but also about the role that the US is playing, actively or passively, in enabling it. Today's discussion will examine these dynamics head on, and we are joined by an exceptional panel to help us unpack these issues with rigor and clarity. I'll introduce each briefly and then we'll begin. So first we have Dr. Christine Fair. She is a professor in the Security Studies program at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. She has previously served as a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation, a political officer with the UN Assistance Mission to Afghanistan in Kabul, and a senior research associate at the US Institute of Peace. Dr. Fair is the author, co-author, or editor of numerous influential books on militancy, the Pakistani military, and political violence in South Asia, including Fighting to the End, the Pakistani Army's Way of War, and her most recent book, The Literature of Lashkar-e-Taiba, Deadly Lines of Control, published by Oxford University Press 2023. She holds a PhD in South Asian languages and civilization from the University of Chicago. She speaks Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi and is known for bringing rigor and a little bit of troublemaking to debates in all three languages. Next, we have Dr. Moeed Pirzada. He is a prominent Pakistani journalist, an analyst, TV anchor, columnist, and a YouTuber currently based in Washington, D.C. He is founding editor of Global Village Space, an online news publication with a print magazine. Previously, Dr. Pirzada anchored his daily political affairs show on several TV channels and has worked with all leading TV networks in Pakistan, including ARY, Geo, Dunia, and Express. He currently runs multiple YouTube channels with millions of followers across social media platforms. Last but not least, we have Erik Sperling, who is the Executive Director of Just Foreign Policy and a former senior advisor to members of Congress, including Ro Khanna and John Conyers. He is currently deeply involved in congressional efforts related to Pakistan and has worked for over a decade to strengthen congressional oversight of U.S. foreign policy, leading initiatives to limit unauthorized military interventions, promote diplomatic solutions, reduce the use of economic sanctions that harm civilians, and oppose U.S. support for harmful foreign regimes. He holds a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. So a big welcome to all our panelists. So for the next 45 minutes, I will ask them a series of questions, after which we will open up the discussion for audience Q&A, and that part of the discussion will be moderated by Danica. So Dr. Fair, let me begin with you. To set the stage, can you walk us through the history of the US-Pakistan relationship, especially how US administrations across party lines have repeatedly backed Pakistan's military for strategic interests, even when it meant sidelining democracy? And building on that, could you also explain to our audience why this current administration, the Trump administration, is once again courting Pakistan's army chief, whom he calls his favorite field marshal, and at what cost? Over
Sure.
to you, Dr. Fair.
It's a lot to accomplish in a small amount of time. So, right after partition, Liaquat Ali Khan, who was Pakistan's first prime minister, came to Washington, D.C., and he said, look, you can have our army if you pay us for it. And the amount of money that he was requesting, Washington just laughed off because it was in excess of the entire amount that the United States was paying for the Marshall Fund to rebuild Europe after World War II. And moreover, at that time, the United States was basically outsourcing its South Asia policy to the Brits. Then came the Korean War in 1950, when the United States figured it should probably have its own Asia policy. It decided that there was some value in a plan that the British had floated called the Northern Tier defense system. This would become the Central Treaty Organization. So Pakistan was quite keen to join these treaty organizations because right after partition, Pakistan's military, though it was stronger than any other institution in Pakistan, was certainly shambolic compared to that of India. And it saw participating in these treaty organizations as being an expedient means to build up its military. So U.S.-Pakistan Defense Partnership began with this Mutual Defense Pact of 1954. Then Pakistan joined CENTO, the Central Treaty Organization. It used to be called the Baghdad Pact until Iraq withdrew. And then it also, in short order, signed CETO, which was the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. What's interesting about these Pakistani maneuvers is that it was doing this all the while it was trying to cultivate relations with China. And so that's a whole other side story, how the United States and China tolerated Pakistan engaging in these activities that would have presumably undermined each other's interests. But both China and the United States made their peace with Pakistan engaging in this sort of, what's the nice word I can use for it, sort of double dealing. Pakistan realized the limits of U.S. cooperation in the 1965 war with India, which Pakistan started. The United States put both India and Pakistan under sanctions. Pakistan was more affected than India was because Pakistan had become so dependent at this point on U.S. weapon systems. And during the 1971 war, which started as a civil war within Pakistan, when the West Pakistani Punjabi-driven establishment engaged in wanton genocide in East Pakistan, Kissinger and Nixon continued to support Pakistan, even though it was illegal to continue arming Pakistan. The Nixon administration continued to do so. And the reason was Pakistan was serving a very important strategic function, which was Yahya Khan, which was Pakistan's second military dictator, was facilitating this opening between Nixon and China. So after 71 passes, Pakistan falls into, again, disuse for the United States because of Pakistan's nuclear program. In 1973, Carter threatens to sanction Pakistan. He even does so. I think the first sanctions happen in 77. The second sanctions occur in April of 1979, just as the Soviets are about to invade Afghanistan. Those sanctions had to be walked back because of the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan. And once again, the U.S. Department of Defense, along with China and Saudi Arabia, opened up vast amounts of defense equipment to the Pakistanis, ostensibly to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan by proxy, the so-called Mujahideen. It's important to note, actually, that Pakistan began the Mujahideen policy in 1973, long before the U.S. even thought of it. A lot of people think that it was a U.S. stratagem, but it really wasn't. And of course, much of this defense assistance is happening under the tenure of Zia-ul-Haq, which is Pakistan's incredibly brutal third military dictator. Once the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, there was no need to continue arming Pakistan while it was proliferating. And the sanctions that had been in abeyance through the Presser Amendment snapped back in essence. And Pakistan was pretty much cut off between 1990 and 2001. And as everyone knows, 2001, 9/11 happens. Pakistan again becomes of vital significance and importance to the United States under President Musharraf. And once again, the might of the U.S. Department of Defense, USAID, basically every arm of the U.S. government steps into the fray to deliver aid, to deliver money, goods, and services to Pakistan. Now, with President Trump and his first administration, all of that came to an end. So coming to your second question, only recently have U.S.-Pakistan relations been revivified. And this is in large measure due to U.S. anger over Pakistan and its double dealing with the Taliban and the war in Afghanistan. It's widely understood that Pakistan is the reason why the U.S. could not maintain a position of dominance over the Taliban in Afghanistan. So where this opportunity seems to have arisen from was Operation Sindoor, which was an Indian operation launched in early May in response to a terrorist attack, which India believed with some considerable justification had Pakistan's imprimatur. Pakistan responded with its own operation, largely using Chinese weapon systems. By the way, all the while the U.S. and Pakistan are having these defense ties, Pakistan's also cultivating them with China. So that's a really important factor to keep in mind, is this China angle that's been existing all throughout the period of U.S. Pakistan relations, and it's been existing without the breaks and discontinuities of the U.S.-Pakistan relations. And by all accounts, what seems to have precipitated this new love affair with Trump and the field marshal is that Trump was adamant that he had brokered a de-escalation off-ramp in Operation Sindoor. Now, for sure, the U.S. was playing this role. The exercises, the military operations escalated out of control very quickly, and the U.S. was essentially pushing on an open door. But Trump wanted credit for this himself. India's Prime Minister Moeed refused to play along. And Asa Munir famously played along with this and offered him the Nobel Peace Prize, nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Pakistan has also been willing to play shenanigans with the cryptocurrency hijinks, and also giving access to American companies to mine the really important minerals that are in Balochistan in particular.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Fair. That was a really comprehensive but very succinct, overview of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. I'm sure there'll be other questions during the audience Q&A, but we'll now move to Dr. Pirzada. Moeed, I'd like to sort of talk about the current moment that we're going through right now. And Pakistan is going through a particularly interesting moment because it's at this time that public awareness and mobilization against military authoritarianism has surged. And this really occurred after the April 2022 ouster of former Prime Minister Imran Khan, and because his ouster was widely perceived to be military orchestrated. And as a result, for the first time in its history, the Pakistani military has faced unprecedented criticism from the public regarding its unconstitutional role in politics, the manipulation of elections, gross human rights violations, the multiple coups that it's orchestrated. And as a result of this blistering public condemnation, the Pakistani military has cracked down like never before. Could you talk about how the Trump administration's cozy relationship with the army chief and this military-backed regime and continued silence in the face of the ensuing crackdown has emboldened the regime? And which human rights violations should people in the US be paying most attention to?
Mehlka, thank you so much. I mean, and also thank you to Professor Dr. Christian Fair for giving a very comprehensive overview. And some of the facts were not very clear in my mind because she has presented the framework of the relationship between United States and Britain to begin with from 1950s or from 1945 onwards. Now, you have, Mehlka, raised so many questions that if I fail to answer some of those, component parts, I mean, maybe you should ask me a counter question. So we need to basically see that the United States' involvement with Pakistan's regime change operation and its sustenance has at least three phases. To begin with, what happened in April 10th April 2022, looked like principally a Pakistani military's initiative. That was not necessarily a Biden administration's initiative. However, given and the Pakistani military, to my understanding and analysis, had been working to remove Imran Khan from the beginning of 2021. So, and they were in touch with their US partners via CENTCOM and Central Intelligence Agency. And the Donald Lu affair makes it very clear, that happens on 7th March 2022, the Department of State was fully on board to the extent that they were waiting for Imran Khan to be removed. And they said once he's gone, Russia looked like as if Russia was the principal cause, but Russia was not necessarily the principal cause. When you look at the Donald Lu's statement that, things are bad if he goes, because Russia was a personal problem for Donald Lu, because he was.
I'm just going to stop you right there, just to let people know who Donald Lu is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So Donald Lu is the
he was the head of the policy. He was the head of the Donald Lu was the Department of State senior most person who was overseeing the relationship with South Asia and Central Asia at that time.
And there had been a letter between Donald Lu and the Pakistani ambassador.
No. So Donald Lu had a meeting with the Pakistan's then ambassador Asad Majid, in which he threatened him. He said that relationship, because of the Moscow trip of Prime Minister Imran Khan, have come to a certain level unacceptable. And if this man goes, because there is a move to remove him, if he goes, then things will become all right. Otherwise, things between United States and Pakistan will go south. So this was turned into a dispatch by the Pakistan's ambassador, who protested and told Pakistan Foreign Office and Pakistani government to protest on this and issue a démarche and so on. But moving forward, I want to move fast on this. At that point, it looks that the Biden administration was not necessarily the initiative of the regime change. The regime change was coming from Pakistani military, but United States institutions, CENTCOM, CIA, and Department of State were sort of willing partners. Then comes the second phase, because of the massive resistance, which probably the Pakistani military didn't expect. Because the miscalculation was they thought that Imran Khan was their creation, and the kind of reaction that took place on Pakistani street, they made them rudely aware of the fact that Imran Khan was far more bigger than their imagination. So the reaction that took place in Pakistan, the protests, repeated, and it spread to the Pakistani diaspora in United States, across Europe and UK. Then comes the second phase in which there were multiple opportunities. If the Biden administration in the United States wanted to stop the journey of authoritarianism in Pakistan, they would have done several things. Their support through the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the GSP Plus of the Europe, the UK aid. Everything kept flowing despite the fact that the Pakistani military violated every norm and every ethic that was stated to be a policy by the administration. But the third phase comes, which is your question, is the special relationship which Pakistani military started to develop with Donald Trump by January 2025. And there I have a slight difference with Professor Christian Fair, because she thinks that the relationship developed as a result of the Operation Sindoor and Pakistan Army's relatively better performance. Donald Trump was very impressed with their performance and all that. I think the relationship, Pakistani military was very apprehensive because of the agitation by the Pakistani diasporas, Pakistani American communities, the House Resolution 901, and so many other things that were happening within the United States. So they had massively invested into looking to find a link with Donald Trump. And the first happenings come somewhere in February, in the beginning of February 2025, when CENTCOM outgoing chief Michael Kurella helps them when they present Sharifullah. He was some Afghan. They said he was part of the Al Qaeda or something, and he was the mastermind. So Donald Trump, in the joint congressional session in February, announces that he thanks Pakistani government for handing over to them the master planner of the Abbey Gate bombing, which happened in 2021 when US forces were withdrawing from Afghanistan. There was a massive, and 14 US servicemen died in this. But when the FBI, so this was actually totally a favor by the US military and they connected the Donald Trump administration with the Pakistani military. Subsequently, they very quickly, even before the Operation Sindoor, they started investing into a relationship which was based on minerals in Pakistan. They started hiring lobbyists. So when Operation Sindoor happened, our understanding is this, and it has been published in Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, that Steve Witkoff, which is the Middle East envoy for Donald Trump, his son Zach Witkoff, that actually is the CEO of the World Liberty, was very intimately linked with the Pakistani army chief. And on 10th April, on the final day when Donald Trump really pushes for ceasefire between India and Pakistan, Zach Witkoff was actually in Pakistan. And then this relationship is being driven by so many things. Nobel Peace Prize, Pakistan became the first country to recommend Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. There are mineral deals, there are real estate deals, there are cryptocurrency, and so many different things. So now I think this relationship is being used against the media, against civil society, for repression, and the Pakistani military is getting more and more emboldened because of the support they actually get from President Donald Trump.
Thank you. And yes, and because there is flagging internal legitimacy of this regime, they really seem to be relying on this external support that they're getting from the Trump administration as a way to bolster internal legitimacy. Thank you so much, Moeed, for that. We're going to now move to how this, as repression inside Pakistan has intensified, resistance has also taken shape beyond Pakistan's borders. And Moeed was just mentioning the role of the Pakistani diaspora. And Erik, now let me turn to you because, you've really been at the forefront, given all of your experience in Congress, at sort of shaping the diaspora's response to what's going on in Pakistan right now. And especially at a time when the Trump administration has emboldened the military regime, the Pakistani diaspora here in the US has been working very hard to engage with Congress to highlight those human rights violations and sort of bring about some kind of targeted sanctions. So given that your work, that you've worked very closely with Pakistani communities in the US and have been very integral to this effort, could you talk about how people have organized, how they have pushed back here in the diaspora? And are you seeing this grassroots pressure to sort of has it begun to shift congressional conversations or challenge the dominant US narrative about Pakistan?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And those are two fascinating presentations. There's a lot of detail, in this long-standing relationship. But I think for kind of a Code Pink crowd, an anti-war crowd, which is the community I come from, I think the key thing to know here is that, Imran Khan opposed the U.S. war on terror. That infuriated people in Washington. He said, "You're not going to reduce terrorism by creating, by bombing families and from with drones." And then he also would be, one of the most eloquent voices in the, if not the single most eloquent voice on Gaza, on Palestine, in the Muslim world. And for those reasons, and then on top of that, of course, this current crisis is because, he's the most popular leader according to all the independent polling and that he was toppled. But, I think that's kind of the main takeaway. And that's why Medea, made that historic visit over a decade ago. And so we're really in kind of the same struggle, but a new version of it, which is, since the fraudulent election that was just, really exceeded expectations about the level of fraud. So what has the community done, and what have activists in the United States done? I mean, I think the key has been from their perspective. Many in the community thought, well, if we just tell our story, that this is a democratic movement trying to throw off a corrupt military, essentially military regime, people in Congress will understand and will appreciate that, and many do. But unfortunately, there's a balancing of interest that goes on in Washington, and we don't see the same standards applied to regimes the U.S. wants to topple and regimes the U.S. wants to overthrow. So, just to summarize kind of this last few years of the work that has been done, people across the community, the Pakistani American community, human rights community have met with members of Congress. They have helped draft letters that over 100 members of Congress have signed. Many senators have spoken out, calling for respect for the elections. That's been multiple letters that have done that. There's the historic vote in Congress that actually got a roll call vote, and it passed with almost no opposition at all. And that called for free and fair respect for the elections in Pakistan. But where the community is now heading, which is a very logical place, is for legislation or action from the White House or from Congress that will actually limit U.S. support for the Pakistani regime, because currently the U.S. is providing support, both political support in terms of treating the Pakistani regime as a legitimate entity, even though it clearly lost an election. I think many Code Pink people will know, the U.S. is very quick to call out illegitimate regimes when it sees it as its interest, but in this case, it is giving that political support. It's continuing to give economic support through its support from the international financial institutions, and then it's continuing to coordinate closely on the military level and on the intelligence level, among other areas. And so where this movement is heading now is, and we have some people such as, Melika has been a leader on this, is moving to propose amendments and legislation that will require respect for human rights and respect for, first of all, the election results in democratic elections and also human rights. But, as we're seeing, there's been many countries that, when the U.S. is not aligned with that country, they're very quick to impose even broad-based sanctions. And in this case, there's been a very strong reluctance both on the part of the White House under Biden and under Trump, and in much of the national security elites in Congress to impose those same standards on Pakistani leaders. So you see Pakistani leaders being free to essentially have their kind of corrupt wealth, hold it in Western banks. This is something that, I think Venezuela, they had individual sanctions like 10 years ago, and we do not even have that limited sanction, which essentially is the same as, signaling to that regime that, we are essentially condoning your appropriation of that wealth and storing it in Western banks. And so, I think those are the angles that the community is working on now, and it's had a huge impact. And I think in general, we've seen the level of this has been by far, more grassroots energy around democracy in Pakistan, scrutiny of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship from the grassroots level, kind of going up and kind of spreading into Congress than has been seen in the rest of the history of the relationship. And so you've seen many people who are, in the senior national security positions adjusting to that. They're at least, introducing legislation that in some ways, at least appears to signal that they're concerned, even if it's not quite going far enough. And so I think, whether in Washington, whether you support the Pakistani regime, which many in the elite sectors do, or whether you support democracy, I think everyone agrees the community's had a huge impact. But there's still a lot more to do because, they're not going to give up on, that close military partnership that they see in their geopolitical interests, without a lot of pressure and a lot of fight. And so I think that's where the community is now.
Thanks so much for that, Erik. And I should just say, you mentioned sanctions, that just so that everybody knows, the Pakistani diaspora, we've been very clear about sanctions not on Pakistan as a whole at all. These are targeted sanctions that we've been calling for those people within the military and civilian leadership that have been perpetrating human rights violations. So those are the things that we've been sort of focused on. Okay, so I will now turn back to Dr. Fair, and I do want to return to one of the central justifications that has long underpinned U.S. support for Pakistan's military. Dr. Fair, Pakistan's military has long portrayed itself to the U.S. as the only force capable of holding back terrorism and chaos, often at moments when it was losing legitimacy at home. Do you see the same narrative being recycled today to secure U.S. military aid and political cover, given the fact that there is no military aid to Pakistan at this point that was ended during the first Trump administration? And how should people in the U.S. be thinking critically about claims of counterterrorism cooperation, given this long history?
I mean, so this isn't going to be an answer that makes at least one of your participants happy. But this has been a canard from the beginning, that Pakistan claims that it's the only one that can fight terrorism, when in fact, Pakistan has been the biggest sponsor of terrorism in South Asia. And it really goes back to 1947. This isn't something that's new. It doesn't go back to 73. It goes back to 1947. And it is unfortunate that there are times when the United States government wants to take this at face value, and we're entering one of those times. Dr. Pirzada is absolutely right. I forgot about that episode where Pakistan threw up, by all accounts, a chicken farmer. He was a low-level ISIS operative. He was not in any way, shape, or form the mastermind of the attack on Abbey Gate. But and even the FBI in its indictment did not support the sweeping claims that the administration was making about this poor fellow. So this is, I think we're entering another one of those phases. To me, it's very redolent of when the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan. The United States basically withdrew from the region and basically outsourced the Afghan policy to Pakistan. And so I see a lot of similarities to what happened in 1990 to what's happening today. And of course, the stakes are a little bit different because the Taliban are an active security threat to the Pakistanis today. So it's possible that the Pakistani claim has a little bit more ballast to it, but I've always viewed that claim with tremendous cynicism. And I've always encouraged other people to view it with equal cynicism.
Just a real quick follow-up, Dr. Fair, for those people who aren't completely familiar, could you say, when you say Pakistan is the biggest supporter of terrorism, what are you referring to? Are you referring to the cultivation of various militant groups over the decades?
Yes. I'm talking going back to 1947. The first thing that the Pakistani state did was it dispatched tribal marauders, later called mujahideen, to go into Kashmir, prompting the sovereign of Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, to sign an instrument of accession to the Indians. It continued to use this, we can call them asymmetric warfare, we can call it proxy warfare, we can call it by a panoply of terms. They all reduce to the same thing, which is using proxies to antagonize India. Of course, this becomes a much more serious problem following the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from Afghanistan, because all of those mujahideen groups Zia was very clever to support those groups the most that he could later repurpose in Kashmir. So this has been, and then we can go through the alphabet soup of the different militant organizations that Pakistan has supported. Of course, the Taliban being a very prominent one. It didn't create the Taliban. I think that's a misperception, but it certainly supported the Taliban. So I'm very cynical of this claim. I often use the expression Pakistan is the arsonist who calls itself the firefighter.
Hmm.
Well, you couldn't have said it more clearly, Dr. Fair, so thank you for that. Dr. Pirzada, let me turn to you. You have personally paid a price for speaking out against military rule. And can you talk about your experience with transnational repression? And for those people who don't know what transnational repression is, it's when foreign governments reach across their borders and target dissidents or their diaspora activists or journalists to silence them primarily. So, can you talk about how you have personally been targeted by the Pakistani regime, and why it should deeply concern anyone who cares about free speech and civil liberties here in the US and not just in Pakistan?
Mehalka, thank you. Mehalka, in the first instance, I was a US resident since 2015, but I had to come here in October 2022 when a very dear friend of mine and colleague, Arshad Sharif, was gunned down in Kenya, apparently, which we understand is by the Pakistani agencies, use their assets or mercenaries inside the Kenyan police to get the job done. So I realized, and I was continuously being threatened, advised, and warned for my tweets and for my commentaries on the Pakistani politics. So I thought it would be safer to leave Pakistan for a while till the new army chief takes over. I thought that the situation will improve in a few months when there will be a military change at the command level, at the top level, from General Bajwa to the next army chief. So I came in the US, but the hopes were dashed because the new army chief was far more radical. And a short while ago, when Professor Fair mentioned the third was the most brutal, perhaps the fifth one, the fifth military dictator of Pakistan, General Asim Muniri, is even far more brutal than General Zia that we had in 1980s. So then actually started a process. They actually created an event in Pakistan. They're very good in creating events. So they created an event of 9th May 2023, which to my understanding and analysis and opinion was a totally choreographed event in which they wanted to take control of Pakistani court system. They wanted to dismantle Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan's party. They wanted to suppress the media, and they wanted to turn around the narrative that the state is under attack. And after this 9th May 2023, while I and many other journalists were in Canada, United States, or UK, like Wajahat said.
Could you just tell the people what happened on May 9th for people who are not familiar?
So on 9th May, Imran Khan was arrested in a characteristic fashion by breaking into a glass house of the Islamabad court, the court registry, in which his lawyers and his guards were beaten and bloodied. And then the paramilitary troops grabbed him by the neck. And a video was made of it that he was being roughed up and grabbed by the neck and was being put into a armored personal carrier. This whole event was staged in a way to enrage the young, supporters of Imran Khan, who were already saying that if anything happened to Imran Khan, they will react. And they were saying, we will go and we'll protest outside the general headquarters or against the residences of the corps commanders. So as predicted, the Pakistani young people and supporters of Imran Khan were enraged by the images which they saw, and they came on the streets and they protested. And then, to our understanding, the regime introduced its own people that encouraged the crowds to go on arson. So there were instances of loot, plunder, and arson, but not to the extent the way they were. It was not the kind of scene that we have seen in Iran or in other parts of the world. It was a very smaller version of the kind of protest. But they used those protests, they orchestrated them, and they said they're under attack by Imran Khan's party. And since then, there have been registered cases against the politicians, the civil society activists, and against the journalists. And these cases have been registered against myself, against Wajahat Saeed Khan, so I was living here since October 2022. But Wajahat Saeed Khan has been living in New York since 2019. Another editor-in-chief of Pakistani newspapers, his name is Shaheen Sebai. He has been living in United States as a citizen for 20 plus years. There's another very prominent journalist, Saber Shakar, who was living in exile. He was warned. He was living in Britain since early part of 2022. And there were other ex-army officers
And
who were
Heather
all
Mehdi and
Haider
Colonel.
Mehdi in Canada, Adil Raja in UK, Colonel Akbar Hussain. Colonel Akbar Hussain is a US citizen and a businessman for the past 20 plus years. So since we were all vocal critics of the military regime, cases of digital terrorism and loot and plunder were registered against us. And then in between, we were also warned that if you don't behave and stop talking, we will, decide the cases against you. We can actually strike a deal with you. And when nothing happened from our side, they actually have recently gone ahead and given us life sentences, double life sentences. So, for instance, I have been given a sentence, and Wajahat has been given a sentence that is amounts to more than 80 years of imprisonment, along with fines and confiscation of property and so on. But these cases against us are just a small flicker of the other things which they have done in transnational repression. For instance, every time the Pakistani American community would protest against the Pakistani embassy or consulate, the embassy staffers and volunteers would take their pictures, will match them with the electronic data they have, because any Pakistani that visits Pakistan applies for a visa or a passport, those people, then they have their electronic data of their families. And on the strength of that electronic matching, profile matching, they have abducted their relatives without registering any cases against them. Inside Pakistan, they roughed them up and forced the American citizens and residents to apologize and to keep their mouths shut. So this is a very interesting, growing, system of transnational repression which the Pakistani military is doing. FBI is aware of it. They have documented several cases. But I think, given the partiality and relationship between the administration and the Pakistani military, the administration or Justice Department and Department of State has not taken any clear position on it. And they're still thinking it's just like one of the countries. I think it's a growing problem. It's a growing problem which is going to hit them because the partiality is encouraging the Pakistani military to become more and more bold. So far, they haven't really made physical attacks on U.S. soil, because India was also trying to do something like this against a Sikh activist, several months ago, and FBI was able to get arrested an Indian agent and brought him and indicted him in New York. But in December and in January, we believe that Pakistani supported, hitmen were used to attack Barrister Shahzad Akbar, who is a former minister in Imran Khan's government, and major
And he's
retired.
in England.
He's in United Kingdom, in Britain, and just in the last 24 hours, all the men have been indicted and presented to the Westminster, court in London, and the prosecution has a lot of evidence and how they were all British-born, white men who had nothing to do with Pakistan. So this is the level of transnational repression that is now emanating from Pakistan.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think as the diaspora is becoming more vocal, more active, their, repression and sort of targeting of dissidents abroad has also increased exponentially. And I think this is particularly important for an American audience to hear, because this is a test of American democracy, right? And European democracy, just to see how well they're able to protect their citizens, their residents, when foreign governments, in this case, the Pakistani government, is trying to infringe on the First Amendment rights of journalists and activists to speak out. And the reason they are sort of targeting these people is to shut them up, to silence their dissent. And again, directly infringing on our rights to speak out against what's happening in
100%.
Pakistan.
100%.
So yes, thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Pirzada. Erik, let me turn to you. Could you talk about, and you might have already touched on this, about what leverage the US has over Pakistan, and what can people here in the US, activists, organizers, faith groups, policymakers, actually do to stand in solidarity with the Pakistani people? What concrete steps can be taken to stop US policy from continuing to prop up authoritarianism in Pakistan under the banner of strategic partnership? Also, is there any particular legislation that people should be aware of?
Yes, thank you so much. And so I think, many of the folks on this call will probably be familiar with the fact that, there's a long fight to end U.S. support for regimes that are human rights violating. Obviously, the most prominent one right now is for the Israeli regime is committing a genocide in Gaza, but this goes back, to U.S. support for South Africa, U.S. support for Chile under the dictatorship, and so on. And so that remains a task in this case. And I think, with that political, military, diplomatic, economic support that the U.S. and its allies in Europe provide, the U.S. has a lot of leverage. But, even if the U.S. didn't have that leverage, we also don't want, as Americans, our tax money to be involved in oppressing people. So I think either way, it's the right thing to do to cut off that support. And a lot of people often ask, well, why are we working through Congress? What can Congress do? And the reason is because it's not that easy to lobby the CIA. I don't know if maybe someone on the call has had success at that. I haven't. It's pretty challenging, and part of that is because or the Pentagon or the White House. And I think it's because our congressional representatives, they do have, for all their many flaws, they do tend to be the most responsive to community pressure. They are able to do those meetings one-on-one where they have to meet a constituent who's saying, my family's being targeted. And these Congress members, the vast majority of them, they don't consider themselves to be bad people. That if you raise something, they're not that likely to say, sorry, your family's being harmed, like we have to do it to fight China. They don't really say that. So I think whether, it's Pakistani Americans on the call or non-Pakistani Americans, both have a really important role to play. Obviously, Pakistani Americans can speak to their own experience or their family's experience. And non-Pakistani Americans can also show these offices that this is an issue that isn't just limited to a particular group in the United States. It's a human rights issue that everyone cares about, and that can really help amplify the pressure and make it harder for those members of Congress to say, this is just a niche issue with one group in the community. And so the best way to do that is to stay in touch with people like Melika, who's become and just has just had amazing success, though we haven't won this fight yet. But in terms of channeling that activism into targeted strategic moves, and so I think the types of things we'll be looking for is, for example, all of this pressure led to the House Foreign Affairs leadership introducing a bill. It's not as strong as we would like, but a floor vote on that bill, which is HR 5271. Having a floor vote on that bill would be a positive step forward that would create a lot of attention on the issue. But ultimately, like I said, we're building towards binding measures that have teeth, whether it means that the U.S. is no longer going to give the green light to corrupt Pakistani military officials to store their corrupt wealth in our banks, or whether it's cutting military support and training that the Pakistani military really covets. They really like that training, and so putting conditions on that so that it's not just symbolic statements, but it's also there are tangible consequences that force a change in behavior. And I think many people believe that if those threats were made in a credible way, the Pakistani regime would be much more likely to take steps to avoid losing that support. So that's kind of the theory of change. But the best way is for folks to, kind of respond and stay in touch with the organizers of this event, such as Melika, who will help, channel people into, what they can do based on their like geographic region, congressional district, and so on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erik. And thank you for raising just this point about the importance of congressional engagement. And I forgot to mention after Dr. Pirzada had spoken that, because we had over the past couple of years cultivated this relationship with our respective congressional representatives, when I was recently targeted, both my senators, Senator Markey and Warren, my representative Richie Neal, and also Jim McGovern, who's been such an incredible ally in Massachusetts, who is also the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. They all wrote a letter on my behalf to the Pakistani ambassador, a letter of concern about why I was being targeted because I was sent a legal notice back in Pakistan. So I feel like those things are very important, and please do stay in touch. Tomorrow we will send out an email, Code Pink will, with all of that information about how you can be involved, how you can get in touch with us, because right now we need all the allies that we can get. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to all of our speakers. We've concluded the first part of our event. I am now going to turn it over to Danica, who is going to be fielding the audience Q&A. She's been getting, I think, a ton of questions, so I don't envy her in this position, but I'm sure she'll do a great job. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all of our guests for your amazing and thorough answers, especially, they're very, very broad, and you've done a great job of giving us context as well as good examples of everything you referred to. I'm trying to consolidate some of these questions. We got a lot of great ones. I think I'm going to direct them at the guests, but if the guests want to chime in after the person I've directed the question at, that's totally fine. We have about 25 minutes for question and answer. So Dr. Pirzada, I'm going to start with you. We got this question that was actually directed to you in the chat. How is increasing reliance on the US affecting Pakistan's military and civilian relations with China?
Okay, I think this question has also been directly. Uh, so far, it appears that the Pakistani military is doing a very smart, clever balancing act. If you look at the short India-Pakistan skirmishes stroke war in May of 2025, China, in an unprecedented fashion, came to bail out the Pakistani military. Without the Chinese military-grade satellites connected to the Pakistan Air Force, overall situational awareness, in Pakistan would not have been able to, perform the way it performed, and it was also using the Chinese equipment, and this despite the fact that the current regime was having a honeymoon with the Trump administration. So I think so far they're actually balancing it very well. Will this balance continue in the future? That remains to be seen.
Thank
Yes, Janet.
you. In case did either Erik or Dr. Fair want to chime in at all on this question?
Oh, I'll just say very briefly that Pakistan has really deftly managed its ties with China and the United States going back to the 1950s. So this isn't something that's new. This is something that's been going on back to the beginning of Pakistan's relations with both the United States as well as China.
Thank you. We had several questions about Imran Khan and his status, so I've consolidated a few into one. And Erik, I know your work with the diaspora has centered a lot on this issue. So Erik, if you want to respond first, and then if either guest wants to chime in. Is there any hope for Imran Khan to get a fair trial on his cases as long as Trump is president and General Asim Munir is around? Do you see any hope for Imran Khan getting his freedom?
Who do you want to respond to it?
You seem eager, Dr. Pirzada. You could go ahead.
Okay.
And then maybe Erik after.
See, Erik, you want to respond to this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, I'm fairly optimistic. I mean, I think, for better or worse, we are seeing older and older leaders. And Lula, I just saw him jumping up and down. He's 80 years old, running for re-election. It's not what in an ideal world what we would have, but I think, from our perspective, you know, the regime and their supporters in the U.S. are fighting a losing battle. And as long as Imran Khan can stay mentally and physically healthy, I think that, the politics of this here in the U.S., the economics of it, in Pakistan, it appears, I think, that it will lead towards that. I think the one thing we do have to, watch out for is, any really extreme action where the regime, sees the writing on the wall and then works to kind of, just in a very evil way, cut that thread off by directly harming him. But I think that's the reason they're very nervous. Both their supporters in the U.S. and in Islamabad. I think everyone feels that it's very possible that he will get out soon, and they're working to counteract that, and we're working to effectuate that from the American side. Because he's widely seen as a Democratic leader. Not for any partisan reason, but just because he pretty clearly won the election and is kind of the Democratic choice of the people there.
Yes. Can I add something to it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Danica, I'm not sure if Imran Khan can get out soon, but I think the dynamics can actually change anytime. because as Erik points out, the regime is under pressure. I mean, they are overcommitting with Trump, they're overcommitting to Middle East. Any kind of accident can happen in their relationship, either with the United States or within the Middle East, where they're now treading very carefully on a fault line between UAE and Israel on one end, and Saudi Arabia and Turkey on the other end. So they have a lot of challenges. There's a lot of internal pressure in Pakistan as well. And if Imran Khan manages to keep good health, things can change at any point.
Great, thank you. Dr. Fair, I'm going to direct this next question to you because I think you answered it more towards the beginning of the webinar, but maybe it would be useful for people to get maybe a bullet point list if
Oh.
if possible. But how do U.S. security and aid policies shape Pakistan's internal decision making, especially in military and intelligence matters?
So I'm not actually sure if I'm the best person to answer that question. I think Dr. Pirzada might be. The U.S., in my experience in dealing with Pakistan, and I might add, I've also been threatened by the Pakistan Army. They threatened me with gang rape by an entire regiment when my Pakistan Army book came out. So I'm not a stranger to how the Pakistan Army behaves when it doesn't like someone. But in my dealings with Pakistan, the United States was frequently trying to get Pakistan to do things differently. Its success rate in coercing Pakistan to do that was really negligible. And I think part of it is because the United States never actually cared enough about these internal dynamics. It was much more interested in securing Pakistan's partnership, even if it was a very derelict partnership, like the situation in Afghanistan. It would not do anything to jeopardize the security relationship. So I don't think we tried it very hard. We didn't try it very sincerely. And to the extent that we did, we didn't succeed. But I don't have a lot of juice with the Trump administration, either Trump 1 or Trump 2. So I can't really say whether or not that characterized Trump 1 and Trump 2. I'm pretty sure it did. But maybe Dr. Pirzada or even Erik Sperling will have a different take on the situation.
So, Taneka, with your permission, I can quickly, I can't read out the questions that are in front of me, but I can try to incorporate answers in my collective answer. So there's Dr. Jalil Khan from Dallas, Texas. There's Shafi Ahmed. There is anonymous attendee. There is Mahmood, there is Mr. Brett. There is Mr. Rich. There are John Lawrence. There is anonymous. So I'm just mentioning them that I can see the question. There's such a long list that I cannot individually answer, but I'll try to respond to these questions. So can you actually sum up, Janeka, the question which that can there be a change in the U.S. relationship? Is this what the gist of the question is towards Pakistan?
The question I asked Dr. Fair was how it impacts internal policy decisions in Pakistan, the U.S. relationship.
So the U.S. relationship is actually very important, if you look at from within Pakistan, because you see the Pakistani economy has always been struggling. Yes, they try to balance with China as well, but there are serious limits to what China can do for the Pakistani regime, in the sense that China can give some loans or some cash, payments or something, or help with the development, but the global financial architecture and the trade architecture on which Pakistan depends, like for instance the International Monetary Fund, Pakistan has been perhaps one of the top of the list countries that has gone to IMF for 24 times. There is a relationship with the World Bank. There is a relationship with the Asian Development Bank. Together they're pumping almost like $10 billion each year into different kind of programs. Then there is UK aid, which used to be called DFID. Then there is a special, and that also pushes up $2 to $3 billion every year into Pakistan. And then Pakistan has GSP plus status, which Pakistan is simply not entitled because of its human rights records. And if the GSP plus status is disturbed, Pakistan can have huge problems. Similarly, Pakistani diasporas works in Saudi Arabia and UAE. Both have very close relationship with the United States. Any kind of disruption in that relationship or US wink of an eye can create problem for Pakistani military regime. Similarly, United States is a major export market for Pakistan, and you see how India is in trouble. Because the United States levied 50% duties. So United States has so many levers of control on the Pakistani military regime, which Pakistani military understands, that if an administration wants to muscle its way, they can get the right behavior. But I think such is the nature of their understanding on Pakistan. They have never been with the Pakistani civil society and the political parties, and Pakistani political parties and people have never been able to cultivate an independent relationship with United States political parties or civil society or the media. In the last 3.5, 4 years, what we see is the lobbying by the Pakistani community is just the beginning. These are just few drops in the ocean which has happened. So if this relationship grows, if the Pakistani people or intelligentsia can develop an independent relationship with the United States in the years to come, that would weaken the direct communication between the Pakistani military and the administrations.
Thank you both. And Dr. Pirzada, because you mentioned India, there's actually a question for Dr. Fair regarding the Trump administration in India that I'll read out. They're curious to hear why the US administration has been so antagonistic to India and positive towards Pakistan. Is this something unique to the Trump administration or just a change in US policy overall?
Oh, I can take that. Now, this is very unique to the Trump administration. Going back to 2000, the India-US relationship really dates back to the 1980s, but in earnest in 2000 under the Clinton administration. So it has been a bilateral goal on the US side, whether it was Democratic or Republican, on the Indian side, whether it was a Congress or whether it was a BJP government. This has been a priority, and we have laboriously built and bureaucratized this a very elaborate cooperative architecture. And I had mentioned this event going back to May. What really seems to be the puzzle, and I've spoken to people who have considerable insight into this, so I'm actually pretty sure I'm right. After Operation Sindoor really began to spiral out of control, and both India and Pakistan realized neither of them had escalation dominance, there was a very significant desire for an off-ramp. The United States played that role. President Trump basically said in a tweet, and he reiterated it in other fora, that he was responsible for peace between India and Pakistan. The Pakistanis, I call this the politics of Chaploosi. So if you don't know Hindi or Urdu, I apologize. There's not, I guess, the politics of flattery. The Pakistanis leapt upon this and they said, yes, you have saved the lives potentially of millions of people in the event that there had been a nuclear conflict that had been averted. The Pakistanis vowed to nominate Trump for the Nobel Prize. Moeed absolutely did not play along. Moeed said, no, you had no role to play. The Indians do not play this politics of Chaploosi in the way in which the Pakistanis do. And this caused a significant rift between President Trump and Moeed, who were long seen to be actually pretty cozy allies. So it's not something that's just unique to the Trump administration. It's something that's really unique to this moment in history when the Indians just wouldn't play along. And shortly thereafter, the United States slapped India with this 50% tariffs, which was unprecedented in the region. So that's the kahani. It doesn't get much more complicated than that. It has been very difficult to do damage control on this relationship. And there's a lot of concern amongst the architects of the relationship that this damage has actually been permanent.
Thank you, Dr. Fair.
Danika, I want to add something. I want to quickly add something. This is the first time in the past several months in 2025 and so on that we have a US president that is personally, in his personal capacity, reacting to the South Asia relationship. Before this, the past 60 plus years, the administrations have intervened on one or the other side. They have helped, pacify the disputes, but they never wanted to take a personal credit, in the way the Donald Trump expected. So Donald Trump, I think there were lobbyists close to Donald Trump that advised the Pakistani military that being recommended or nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize is a very strongly felt emotional lead with the president. And on the other hand, the Indians were simply not prepared to go that way. So a very adverse person. The personal relationship is actually working very well with the Pakistani military generals, and the personal relationship is working against India and the Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the other hand. But this has never been a personalized relationship in the history of South Asia versus United States.
Thank you to both of you. Eric, I have actually probably two or three questions for you, but someone asked you about skateboarding in DC, but maybe you could post that online somewhere. Um, you did a great job speaking to Code Pink's audience. Is a lot of people who are tuning in from our list specifically. We work a lot on Venezuela. This is our first public facing thing on Pakistan in a long time. So our list isn't as familiar. So someone's asking you to recompare our US policy from to Venezuela to Pakistan, if there's any useful parallels there or not for the audience.
Yeah, the parallels are incredible and extremely revealing. I mean, you have in Pakistan, a long-standing, regime that has very little legitimacy, many or more democratic, problems with division of power and checks and balances that Venezuela has been accused of having. And yet you see from the U.S. the exact opposite reaction. The U.S. never intentionally destroyed the Pakistani economy to undermine, the regime there. In fact, they've done the opposite. They've propped it up. But even despite all that support, the Pakistani regime lost the election horribly because they're so illegitimate, is what according to basically all experts. So it's incredible that, anyone is saying, wow, Maduro's a horrible, undemocratic dictator. And then the next thing they'll say is, well, but Pakistan's an important strategic partner. I mean, I think that essentially exposes the entire thing. And so, there has been, especially back during the Biden administration, when Ryan Grim was in the State Department briefings, he would bring this up really effectively, and it was incredibly difficult for this, even the very advanced Biden State Department people to explain it. And so I think that's the comparison is in one case you have, the US is supporting a regime. That regime is illegitimate and the US is continuing to prop it up. In another case, the US is starving a population intentionally to undermine a regime and then pretending that they care about the well-being of those people there. So I think that at least should answer the Venezuela part, hopefully. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's super illuminating. Thank you. And I have another question for you. Um, Oh, where is it? Okay. If the House flips after midterm elections and Democrats
Donica,
take control,
Donica, I have to get off the phone. I've been up since 7:30 teaching all day today. So my understanding was that this was ending at 9.
9:15. But if you need to go, that's totally fine.
It's just
Yeah,
ending in
yeah.
6 minutes.
Okay. I'll wait for 6 minutes. I just want to make sure it wasn't going to 9:30.
Oh, no, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Um, if the House flips after the midterm elections and Democrats take control of Congress, how likely is it that Congress will restrict aid and put sanctions? Also, is it short-sighted planning by the Pakistani military to put all their support towards the Trump administration, which might alienate Democrats?
Yeah, well, those are, yeah, I mean, I'll start with the second question first, which is just a really astute question. This is a very common thing, actually. It's been happening more and more as people try to appeal to Trump and get him to, because he's pretty arbitrary, you don't know which way he's going to go. So people are really going all in to try to sway him in many instances. This happened in Venezuela. Machado did that. And it's harmed her popularity with other people. But so that's certainly the risk the Pakistani regime has been running. And it's definitely something that we should be able to use to help show Democrats that kind of further a lot of Democrats in Congress are concerned about Trump's corruption, concerned about his alliance with dictatorships, and so the Pakistani regimes kind of just over the top praise and alliance with him definitely will help with that. But in general, one of the unfortunate things we have in the U.S. is the two-party system. When Biden is doing something that's harmful, we can, for example, no one would have thought that Republicans would be the ones, pushing for more restraint in Ukraine. They're obviously consistently been the more hawkish party, but when Biden was funding it, they became slightly more pro-restraint. And so I think we have the opposite thing here. It's definitely what happened in, when Trump was doing the Yemen war. We had Democrats in Congress, and we were able to pass war powers resolutions to restrict that, even though it was previously an Obama policy. So all that to say is, I think we will have huge opportunities. If we were to do nothing and just let the House Foreign Affairs Committee handle it, I think the odds are close to zero that they would pass restrictions on Pakistan. But I think with the movement that's being built, and hopefully with the support of some people on this call, we will have a very strong chance of doing it, in part because Democrats have introduced strong amendments, in this year. And so then we'll be able to say, let's pass those under a Democratic House and Senate. And so I think that's where we're aiming for, as the last, as kind of if we can't get things done under this Republican Congress, we would definitely be able to have historic votes in Congress if Democrats do take the House or Senate.
Thank you, Eric. All right, I think I'll do one more question and I'll direct it to Dr. Farrow or Dr. Pirzada, whoever wants to take it. There's a question about, we have a couple more minutes. So a question about U.S. institutions that fund Pakistani NGOs, for purposes like democracy promotion and that kind of thing. There's a question, what transparency and oversight mechanisms ensure these funds are used appropriately? And how can U.S. policymakers prevent democracy assistance from inadvertently reinforcing elite capture?
Yeah, Dr. Fair, go ahead.
I'm not really sure actually, because my understanding is there's not a lot of funding going to Pakistani organizations right now. Um, I mean, I mostly looked at what happened to USAID money in its democracy and governance program, and there was very little oversight because USAID mostly cared about execution of funds rather than on the ground material results. So I was always a big critic of USAID because, like for example, the democracy and governance program of USAID during General Musharraf's period actually aided and abetted the general's plans for local governance, which had nothing to do with local governance, but rather shoring up his own regime. I mean, I'm going to turn the question around, and because this question hasn't come around, and talk about something else that's really important that the Pakistani state does. It cultivates scholars, right? We don't need to mention their names. If you're a Pakistan watcher, you know who they are. They pay for individuals to come to Pakistan. They roll out the red carpet. They introduce them to all of the brass and the Pakistan military, less so on the civilian side. And then the quid for that quo is the expectation that those scholars will come back and write flattering pieces about Pakistan. There are a lot of think tanks that are very, very close to the Pakistani establishment, the Middle East Institute being one of them. And you'll find that people at these think tanks have been very loath to criticize the Pakistani state because to run their programs, they require visas and they require access. And so basically the Pakistani elites, and by elites, I mean the elites in uniform, essentially bribe these scholars with a pay to play. You do what we want you to do, and we will literally pay for your program here to Pakistan. We'll continue to give you access. And so I think that really needs to be understood why there are so few vocal proponents of a real change in Pakistan, like myself. And I mean, Moeed's in a different category. But if you look at usually the people who espouse my line are people of Indian origin. There are very few Americans of American origins who are as critical as the Pakistan Army, because I don't pay by their pay to play scheme. But I can point out, and you can probably identify them, the various individuals in think tanks. Now, some of these think tanks have been doged, right? So the individuals, the U.S. Institute of Peace is another important institution. I used to call the U.S. Institute of Peace the U.S. Institute of Pakistan. They required access in Pakistan to run their millions of dollars of programming through the country. And they would be very loath to publish anything critical of the Pakistani state. So I want to turn that question a little bit on its head and look at how the Pakistani government itself cultivates support in U.S. Academy and intelligentsia.
Very interesting point. There's not much time is left with Danica. Dr. Fair has raised a very interesting question, and most Pakistanis, I think, are not aware of the fact that how The Pakistani regimes have cultivated the US think tanks and certain instances, perhaps the universities. Excess is one thing, giving you business class tickets to fly, putting you in five-star hotels in Islamabad, giving you access to the top military brass and to the ministers and to the important people of Pakistani politics and civil society and the media. I mean, these people, when they are taken to Pakistan, they're treated like VVVIPs. They're given the kind of treatment they have never seen in United States or Europe or anywhere. So this is how, and Middle Eastern countries are also doing the same. This is another form of controlling the US narrative on democracy and human rights. And then in certain instances, I think, which I personally know, but I don't want to name, US think tanks have been creating chairs in Pakistan, dedicated in which they have compelled the Pakistani American community to cough up $1 million or $500,000. And this is how they buy the loyalty for the scholarship. So the net result is this, that you don't find anyone, any voice in Washington, literally the kind of voices you have all around them together, like Erik Sperling and Christian Fair and Moeed Pirzada. I mean, there may be three more people. So there is no narrative on what's happening on Pakistan. Look at the kind of massacre and killing that took place in Pakistan in November 2024. And apart from an occasional drop site publication with Ryan Grimm and some story that appeared in BBC Urdu and Al Jazeera, the whole Western media has remained silent on the killings in Islamabad.
Thank you to both of you, and thank you to Erik. I do want to be respectful of people's time. I know we didn't get to answer everyone's questions, but luckily we have a part two. I want to thank Mahelka for facilitating the first half of the webinar, and to CAPJ for everything. And thank you to Dr. Pirzada, Dr. Fair, and Erik Sperling again. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Please stay in touch and please attend our follow-up webinar on Sunday, February 1st. It's at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So we'll talk more broadly about the US-Pakistan relationship and its effects on the region more broadly. And we'll be joined by Aisha Siddiqa, Junaid Ahmed, and Wajahat Said Khan. And you could RSVP at codepink.org/Pakistan 201. And I hope to see you there. Thank you for joining. And you could follow the Community Alliance for Peace and Justice and Code Pink for additional resources. And if you RSVP to this webinar, you will be receiving a follow-up email with relevant links and reading materials and how to follow all of our speakers today. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all
Bye.
so much. Thank you, Danica. Thank you, Code Pink, and thank you to all our
Thank you.
incredible speakers.
Thank you for organizing this and conducting it. Thank you, Malika. And thank you, Danica.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Great night. See you on Sunday. Bye.
See you Sunday.